Hi, everyone. I'm going to give you all a moment to get settled in your uh, space, wherever you are, at home or in an office or elsewhere. I'm so glad you're here with us today. I'm Julie Moose. I'm the Executive Director of the National Press Club Journalism Institute. And I'm joined behind the scenes by Beth Francesco, the Deputy Executive Director of the Institute, and Holly Butcher-Grant, Growth Manager for the Institute, who you will see in the chat. We're so happy that you're here with us today for this program of Women's Voices, and we appreciate you making the time to be here with us. We know your time is valuable. We do have a live transcription option available. So if you're joining us on a desktop or laptop, you can enable it at any time by finding the CC Live transcription button in the navigation menu and then click Show Subtitle, and the closed captioning should start. We're also putting directions in the chat, including if you are joining from a mobile device. And for a little bit more logistical information, we'll be recording this program and a link to the video will be emailed to you. So don't worry if you miss something, it will be jam-packed, but you can always rewatch or re-listen later. And we will also provide highlights from the program along with video in our newsletter and on our website. So if you aren't already receiving our daily newsletter for journalists, you can subscribe now. I think Holly's going to put the link in the chat. So this program is designed to be a conversation among these wonderful women, and we hope you'll join in with comments and with questions. Please add your questions to the Q&A queue at any time. We'll be taking them throughout the program. And please share, any comments or anything else you'd like related to the topics in the chat. We'll be watching that too and bringing some of those in. Before I introduce our wonderful panel, I just want to thank the Gannett Foundation for supporting our programming related to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in newsrooms and in journalism. Their support helps keep programs like this free to participants like you. And now, the reason you're actually here, welcome to our panel and hello. It's such an honor to spend an hour with you all. We feel very fortunate. So we are joined by Soraya Chemaly, who is award-winning author of Rage Becomes Her and co-founder of the Women's Media Center Speech Project. Deborah Douglas, co-editor-in-chief of the Emancipator and also a teacher. Allison Gilbert, journalist and co-author of Listen World about Elsie Robinson and author of several other books. Donna Rubin, creator of Speaking While Female and an award-winning journalist, and Connie Schultz, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist, novelist, and professor. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let us start at the very beginning, or the beginning of the beginning. This country was founded with language that said all men are created equal, not all people, and not really all men. They meant white men, free men, and certainly not women. So we start with some voices excluded from equality, public policy, and the public square. And I'm wondering, Deborah, if you can talk a little bit about women's voices being unequal from the beginning, Black women's voices being even more subjugated, and how inequity led to the original Emancipator.
Well, yeah, I mean, women are not even mentioned in the Constitution, so let's start there. The story of, the Emancipator, first of all, reimagines the first abolitionist newspaper in the United States, the first truly abolitionist, like, let's end this today, no gradual approach, let's end it today and fully enfranchise this group of people into the American project. It was short-lived, but it was founded in Jonesboro, Tennessee in 1820 by Elihu Embry. And the goal was to amplify the cause of ending Black enslavement. But other abolitionist newspapers, such as those that thrived in the Northeast, where I am right now, not only called for the end of Black enslavement, but they imagined a world where they could see Black people engaging in our systems, in our society, in the economy. And so if you go back and you look at a lot of those old papers, if you look at the microfilm, you'll see information on how you start a business and how do you engage with society and how you build institutions. So it was so much more than let's just stop this practice and then walk away. It was, let's stop this practice and really integrate these people into the American project. And so we were relaunched. Actually, our official debut was in April of this year. We're announced a while ago. We're relaunched to reimagine what that original Emancipator did for a new day, to amplify themes and causes and ways of understanding how systems are created that produce racial inequality and the intersections thereof. You know, there's race, but then there's some other stuff, right? There's gender, there's sexuality, there's immigration status, there's ability, you know, all the things. And so we feel like if we have a sustained conversation about how our society is actually put together, we can have a better understanding of how we can deconstruct the things that don't work and make the things that work better. And so we're engaging in solutions journalism practices towards that end, which slows the stories down, right? It zeroes in on the how done it, how did you do that? And shows people being agents of their own salvation, which to me, you know, having been in this business 30 plus years, is a fallacy of how our traditional approach, which is not slowing down long enough to show people actually thinking, doing, and trying to solve problems. You know, we just want to just get that oh, gotcha story or get those clicks or whatever, but not that space in between. So we're pulling that through line. And you know, the original Emancipator, who believed that everybody's voices mattered, right? And so, and we think that too. And so we want to show the way forward with that. And I would just end by saying that a lot of people don't like to hear this, but Nicole Hannah-Jones has said this many times, that is Black people and the way that we have pursued the ideals of the American project that has made this country true to what it says on paper, to paraphrase Dr. King, right? We get mad, we march, we plan, we sue, we do everything that we have to do, and Black women are part and parcel of that struggle. And I'm not just here just to speak on behalf of Black people, but because the Emancipator point of entry is the Black experience, that's an experience to a bigger perspective about how this deeply embedded in fairness impacts us all.
Thank you. Thank you for speaking on behalf of you, and thank you for speaking on behalf of the Emancipator, and helping everybody kind of understand the history there and what it means for amplifying voices. And that's a great transition to something, Connie, I'm going to ask you to speak about. Should have had this book ready, but you recently reviewed Formidable for the Washington Post, and it's a book about American women in the fight for equality from 1920 to 2020. And the way you described it in your Washington Post review was as an intersectional account of what it has meant to be a woman in America for the past century. So, and I think if I understood right, it maybe is sort of the first general, truly intersectional account. And so I wonder if you can talk a little bit about what you took away, and also, you know, kind of what happens when more women's voices are included in our history.
Well, we get a very different picture of history always. This book is by Elizabeth Griffith. And I admitted when I first started reading it, I thought, you know, I'm a lifelong feminist. Do I really need to read another 400-page book about it? And as it turned out, yes, indeed, I did. What she says early on is that we need to be mature enough to both confront, I want to get this right, to confront and celebrate our history. And this book is a confrontation over and over again, but in doing that, it becomes a celebration. For example, many of the early suffragists supported lynching. So race was a huge issue in the early movement throughout. It always has been. You know, I can let me just put it this way. I still get mail from women who claim to be ardent feminists who will say things that I don't even know if they understand how they sound, but they are definitely sounding racist, right? But also things like Frances Perkins, the first woman to be a Secretary of Labor, didn't support all working women. She supported women who she thought needed to have jobs to survive. So really, she wasn't supporting the idea of careers. It was you were making money to make a living. These stories are so important because the fiction doesn't really fuel the future anyway. If your understanding of the women's movement is essentially fictionalized, there really aren't you don't have the ground beneath your feet that you need to understand that it will always be hard. It will always be challenging. That inclusion is essential. If you're really going to say, if you're advocating for women, well, which women, right, is an important question to be asking. The good news here is, and those, all of you are writers too, so I'm sure you'll understand what I mean. I suspect many in our audience are. If you depict somebody as a hero in this way, where they have no flaws, they always did the right thing, that can't inspire anybody, because those people don't really exist. Mm-hmm. And they certainly don't reflect anything that we don't recognize any piece of ourselves in them. The stories to tell are of the flawed human beings who found their way anyway. And the movements that had great dissension at times, that had really healthy arguments about where it should go and in what direction it should go and how soon, how quickly. All of these things really matter, because that's how you grow a movement, right? It's the more people you include, the more of these discussions you're going to have. And to me, the takeaway always is, and that's the good news, right? It is not a smooth path. Just as all the obstacles women confront, there is no map for that, right? Just when we think we've overcome one piece of it, another boulder is rolled in our way. And the more we can understand that some of us are not as affected as others in that, then we can become the advocates we need to be, and we can carry as we climb. Is the other really important thing here, is that those of us who have known a certain level of success, it will die with us. That will be our legacy if the only thing we do is celebrate our own careers. But if we are doing all that we can in all these different ways to help carve out paths. I say this a lot to my fellow boomers. I'm not asking anybody to step aside, but I am saying we need to make room. And particularly listening to younger women, and in my case, to listening to women who don't look at all like me, that's where my growth continues. And if I can continue to grow, then I can become a more effective leader.
Thank you so much, Connie. I feel like there were so many tweetable, quotable pieces of what you just said. And I think one of the ones that's going to stay with me, especially in the context of what Allison's going to talk about next, and we're going to continue to talk about, is that celebrating the fiction does not support the future. I think that's such an elegant way to describe how the illusions are not helpful. And the simplifying is not helpful, and that complicating the narrative is actually the greatest service that we can provide. So Allison, let's talk a little bit about Elsie Robinson, who you wrote this book about, that is co-authored this book about, which is coming out 2 weeks from today, and who was a very complicated woman who certainly at an unusual time for women to do this, used her platform to help raise up other women, and who also had a lot of challenges and imperfections. So over to you to talk to us a little bit about Elsie.
First of all, I want to say something about what Connie just mentioned about fiction not fueling the future, or something like that, Connie, if I got your quote a little bit wrong. I also think a vacuum of information also doesn't fuel the future. And the fact that Elsie Robinson was so well read during her lifetime, more than 20 million readers, and that's conservative. If you do a math exercise in a different way, it could be upwards of 50 million readers. I'll bore you with that, but those are the numbers. They're extraordinary. To have her just disappear from history and not have her legacy inform today's journalists or today's feminists, what have you, I think is something that is eye-opening for me, and something that I had hoped that in part by co-writing this book, Listen World, would help solve, or at least put a little bit of a Band-Aid or a bridge to one part of history to today. And so to me, the vacuum of information that had been about Elsie Robinson was my fuel of why I wanted to move forward and write the first biography of her life.
So tell us a little bit more related to Elsie about some of the things that she advocated for. And then Donna, I'm going to come to you to talk about the many voices you've collected for Speaking While Female and some of the lost voices that maybe you found. But Allison, you found Elsie. I mean, and the story, actually, if you don't mind, share the story of how you discovered Elsie, and then a little bit about the impact that she had on you, but also on others.
Well, on a very personal and brief account, I only found out about her because my mother died. My mother died shortly after I graduated college, and I went back to my childhood home to pack up her belongings. And there in one of my mother's books was a folded up piece of onion skin paper. Remember the old onion skin paper? She had retyped a poem. The poem was extraordinary. It was called Pain, and it was about grief. And it was the most tough love, incredible poem. It was the kind of tough love I needed in that moment. And it was attributed to someone named Elsie Robinson. And I had no idea who Elsie Robinson was. And it set me on the path for writing Listen World. Oh, sorry. And you wanted to,
That's okay. That's
and you
okay.
wanted to know the kinds of things that she had written about. I don't want to extend my time and not hear from everyone else on the panel, so forgive me. But she, of course, wrote about feminism, but she would never use the word, and she would never have called herself a feminist, which at that time, words are really important, and it was equated to being a man hater. And so she didn't want to be labeled a man hater, but she certainly used her column to speak to gender inequality, to question and even call other women to the mat about why are you staying home? So she wasn't just about blaming, let's say, a male culture. She also wanted women to look more closely at their own choices and where those decisions are coming from. She talked about race. She talked about anti-Semitism, capital punishment. And one thing I would say too, that I think made her somewhat of a unicorn even today, and why she became the highest paid woman columnist in the Hearst empire, was that she also drew her own editorial and political cartoons. And we could talk about this later, but some of them, when you look at them today, they need a little bit of context, a little bit of explanation about where some of those opinions that were only communicated in art form were coming from and how they were informed. But I think she was a double threat. She was a double threat because she communicated with words in her column, and she was a poker, a prodder, a provocateur, because if you didn't want to read her column, you still got her point by, looking at her cartoons.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think we're going to come back to her lobbying for her salary and pay gaps in news for women and women of color. We're going to come back to that a little bit later. So thank you for planting that seed. So Donna, you, as I said, you've collected many, many voices for your Speaking While Female project, and you are curating it into a book coming, I believe, in spring 2023. So we've heard about how Allison found Elsie. Talk a little bit about some of the recovered voices that you have found, some of the lost voices that you have found.
Right. Well, just by way of big picture background, I got really obsessed some years ago by the fact that we heard so few women's voices in the public square. And of course, I did a lot of speech writing. I still do a lot of speech writing. And I can't tell you how many times I heard a quote by Churchill. I was so infuriated to hear so many quotes by Churchill. And I thought, why are we not quoting women? Where are all the women's voices? And I started buying up anthologies, speech anthologies. I ended up buying about 250 of them and putting them all in an infographic and demonstrating that from the earliest days of America, even predating the nation, we have had women speaking, putting their voices into the public square, but we have not kept their voices. We haven't recorded their voices. We haven't championed their voices. They've spoken, but what happened to their words? Where did their ideas go? You know, if a tree falls in the forest, what is its significance? What impact does it make? So I started creating an online speech bank. I have about maybe 3,000 speeches there by women throughout history, not just in America, but throughout history. But specifically, I have them in buckets, and I have a bucket for women in journalism. And I took a look at it in the last few days in preparation for this conversation, thinking about what does it mean to have a voice? It's a question that I've pondered a lot, and I'm, of course, interested in everybody's point of view, but I've thought a lot about the voice. Of course, the idea of having voice and speaking and sound coming from our vocal cords and our larynx, that's one meaning of voice, but it's a relevant one, but it's a metaphor, of course, for having a larger voice. And to have a voice, I believe, in the conversation is to have a stake in it, to have a stake in the outcome, and to be agentive, to have an agency in the outcome of course of events. And I started looking at the strategies that these women journalists use to put their voices in the public square. Women like Dorothy Thompson, Sojourner Truth, Jessie Daniel Ames, Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, Ida B. Wells, Ida Tarbell. These are all women who were journalists or who used the media in very savvy ways. And to state the obvious, but I think it's worth stating, there were two main strategies for doing that. One is speaking, and the other is writing. And these women did both. They spoke whenever they could. They spoke as we are today. They spoke in panels, at conferences, at events, in speeches galore by the thousands. They spoke, but they also wrote. They wrote editorials, they wrote articles, they wrote op-eds. When no journal would take them, they founded their own journals. A number of the women that I just mentioned had their own publications. Women like Josephine St. Pierre Ruffin, Hovita Idar. These are women who had their own publications and put their voices in the world because they knew that it mattered. And it distresses me that so many of the voices aren't current, that we don't know who they are. And so I'm on a campaign, a mission to restore their voices so that we appreciate and don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? The sentence that, the question that sends me around the bend is, how come I never heard about her? How come I never heard about her? We shouldn't have to, every generation, rediscover these women. So it's so important what each of us is doing to recover these voices and put them into circulation so that we can build on these ideas and move forward.
Yes, 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 yes. I wanted to turn next to you, Soraya. You have long been attuned to how women's voices are used and how they're muted and how they're silenced and how they can be lost. And I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about that in response to Donna, and also, sort of in general, how you've seen that change or not change over time.
Thank you. So I want to just ditto everything everybody said and then be a little contrarian. all of us have worked, I think, very hard, not only to make our own voices heard, but to try and lift the voices of others. So, for example, the Women's Media Center is dedicated, as Donna said, to trying to basically prove that there are women, that they're being marginalized, that they're marginalized to different effect based on identity and on the larger cultural preferences that we all have to navigate. But I think too that I think there's so much having to do with just brute power of erasure and what that means. So it's hard to say words like white supremacist heteropatriarchy. It's a big mouthful, but it is what we are dealing with. And we do recreate the wheel every generation, not because women are not being strong, they're not being vocal, they're not getting engaged, they don't have desire to be part of the public sphere. We are clearly, we know that, right? It's because there is a systematic erasure of what happens, which is why educational places are such flashpoints in our cultural debate, right? We need control of information. That's the way it works. And so a lot of my own career has been affected by online harassment and hate, leading me to work with many coalitions and many different groups of people, and ultimately at the Women's Media Center to establish a way for media itself to understand why it matters. 10 years ago, if you really tried to raise a flag and said, you know what, this horrible thing is happening to people online. Women, particularly Black women in the United States, are being targeted. They're being targeted in organized ways. It's a threat to freedom. It's a threat to freedom of expression. It's a threat to democracy. You literally got the feminist pat on the head. Isn't that cute? Go keep yourself safe, right? And we still encounter that kind of resistance if we try and talk about racialized and gendered disinformation, right? People don't want to hear about that. They don't think it's political. They think it's a private problem, like all violence against women that belongs in the private sphere, where we are personally responsible for keeping ourselves safe. And so, you know, when I think about silenced voices or muted voices, I think, who is doing the silencing? Who is doing the muting? I have kept myself safe my whole life and I'm still not safe. So, you know, if we can't directly address the accountability of the people who can make change with disproportionate power, then I think we're going to see the next generation also recreate this wheel. And, you know, we were talking about this earlier. I'm pretty sure, as we all know, the audience for this show is a whole boatload of women, you know, and when I do speaking engagements now, I try and get organizers to make it a Bring a Man event. I'm like, this is what's going to happen. Okay, you want to talk about racism? You're going to get mainly people of color and Black people in the room. And we need white people in the room to talk about racism in America, right? We need men in this room to talk about patriarchy and white supremacy and their intersections at the very top of our power structures. And so that's what I think of when I think of muted voices.
It's funny, when you said systematic erasure, that really resonated with me, because I was just casting about for a word to call what happens even before erasure. And actually, I decided to coin it, and I wrote about it in 400 Souls. And I call it depresencing. And I decided to define it around the one thing I know stone cold, and that's being a woman and being Black.
Yeah.
The way that cis white patriarchy has of disregarding Black women in physical spaces and in narratives, as if he'd never existed. To be erased, you had to have existed, but there's a sensation in the world of never having existed. If you look at, for example, there's that state senator in Louisiana. He was talking about mortality rates in Louisiana. And if you take Black women out of the equation, the number is not so bad. That's depresencing. That's just taking us out of the entire story. And what is the story? it starts off as a personal narrative, but it becomes part of a cultural norm, which becomes part of a policy, which becomes a law, which becomes the whole life that we live.
It's interesting about the erasure question. There's a statistic from the National Women's History Museum that speaks to exactly this, but at the kind of the core, at the epicenter in our public schools, which is that 24%, only 24% of all historical figures that are taught K through 12 in this country are women. When you think about, and my children went to public schools here in this country, when you think about that exposure in school, in the classroom, if you don't see a history, if you don't learn a history, if you're not exposed to a history, then of course that doesn't exist. And smarter academics, smarter writers than me have come up with the reason why this is. Why is it that only 24% of all historical figures taught in public schools are women? And it's because the curriculums are wholly masculine. One educator called it doggedly masculine. When you teach history in social studies in classrooms across the country that are really through the prism of war and peace, economy, politics, these things where men have tended to be dominant, as opposed to labor rights or civil rights or the arts or immigration, where women have tended to have more influence, that skews what students learn in the classroom, and students grow up to be adults, clearly. And so that is part of the issue.
So this is so interesting. I mean, kind of getting a sense of the macro realities and the macro systemic patterns that have brought us to where we are today. And I think one of the things, just to stick with the model, Connie, that you set up with both, to confront and celebrate. I think one of the things that's interesting about this conversation and maybe this moment is that people are reclaiming and rewriting history. The 1619 Project rewrote history. It didn't change what happened. It changed the understanding that some of us had of what happened, and understanding that many Black Americans in this country already had of what happened. Just formidable as another example. In this moment is a way of reframing what we think we know, and choosing to rewrite the narrative in a way that is more accurate and more relevant for looking to the future, I think. And so, one of the questions that's come up as we've talked about this is the challenge of deciding who to claim, what to distance ourselves from, what to contextualize, and sort of wrestling with what it means to rediscover and maybe more importantly, to reintroduce people or introduce some people for the first time to people, places, priorities that they may resist and really may not understand. So I wonder if we can talk a little bit about that. Allison, I know you engaged in some sensitivity, you engaged sensitivity readers on the Elsie book. So I wonder if you can talk about that, and then Donna, maybe talk about, you've mentioned you put almost everything in the archive, but not everything, and sort of have some problematic people in there that you might want to talk about. And then Deborah, I'm going to come to you for the great reframe that you did on what to call some of this and what to do about it.
I want to answer.
May I add a question to this discussion?
Yes, please.
I just, it seems to me in part what we're talking about, and perhaps because I'm hearing is as a white woman, allyship is really important. That whatever forum I have becomes larger, it certainly becomes magnified in its influence if what I use whatever influence I have to magnify the voices of those who are not being heard, right? And if we're talking about context, what that means to me almost always is I need to include more voices. If I need context, I need to be listening to more people and including their accounts. So as we're answering this, I'm just asking of everyone, am I onto something here when I think about the importance of that? Yeah, that's it. I guess that's where, I mean, I just think of what I'm often criticized for by people who don't like what I'm writing is why do I feel the need to find Black people to talk about this? Why do I feel the need to be advocating for the LGBTQ community? So I must be silently, quietly a lesbian. I mean, it's very hard for a lot of people who don't want to hear from us to understand allyship, to understand why we value, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. We value including the voices of others. And I just wanted to put that out there as everyone's answering, because I feel like I'm learning so much in this discussion, and maybe I'm a little off base here, but it's where I also just want to say this, I don't mind that it's mostly women in our audience, because I see this as an attempt to lift the voices of women and to encourage more women to lift their own voices. I understand the men are always the problem in many a work environment, but I also know we don't wait for the invitation, and we certainly don't wait for them to decide they're going to listen. We force them to listen. We force them to, we make it impossible to be ignored. And so that's one of the values I see of conversations like this.
Excellent. Thank you.
There's so much to address. And I know you asked me a question about the review of the book that we did of the final manuscript before we went to print. But there's so much of what Connie just said. I feel like I'm torn with what to answer. But, you know, Elsie Robinson didn't have our vocabulary back in the 20s and 30s and 40s. And so allyship was not the word. But what I could take from that and turn around and bring back to the audience in terms of her voice and how she used it in her column is that she would talk about issues of the day that may have been dismissed by her white readers. And I'll give you a case in point. There was a case that she talked about, a capital punishment case, where there were a bunch of teenagers, I think maybe 4, that were all sentenced to death because they had killed somebody. And the image, it's very graphic. So I warn folks about the graphic nature of what I'm about to say. It was a noose. And what she said was, what if this was for your boy? And in her column, it talked about a mother's anguish about mistakes, a mother's anguish about dealing with just unimaginable consequences of decision-making. And so I bring this up because there was no word for allyship back when she wrote her column or drew that particular cartoon. But the message from a white woman, which Elsie Robinson was incredibly reflective of what, Connie, you're talking about now in the way we're talking about this during this conversation. So I wanted to share that. And in terms of the review we did for the book, unfortunately, I must admit, it came rather late in the game. It should have come sooner. We, my co-author and I, my editor, everyone who touched the manuscript, I think collectively, I shouldn't speak for anyone else but me, I had a blind spot. And columns that she wrote back when, cartoons that she drew years ago, required context from 2022 to make them more understandable, not more relatable, but to ground them in current thinking and not just let it go, not let it slide, not just keep passing it along. And these were 11th hour edits that, to be honest, are some of my proudest of the whole book.
Thank you.
You
Yes,
asked me.
please. Yes, please.
Yeah, I think what you're asking is as a question of curation. And as journalists, processing information, making decisions about what we highlight, what we include, what we don't include, we're all curators in a sense, in the same sense that when you go into a museum and you look at an exhibit and you see certain exhibits, they're all curated. They're all filtered through one person's choices and decision making. And it's particularly a problem for me right now in curating an anthology of women's speeches, but it's a problem and a challenge for all of us. But for example, a volume that has women's voices across the history of America, 400 plus years of America. You have a Susan B. Anthony and a Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Do you mention them? And you have all of my introductions have 425 words. How much weight do you give to the flaws? How much weight do you give to the fact that that they worked all their lives against slavery, for women's rights, but they were racist? Were they a little bit racist? Were they a lot racist? Does their racism color everything that they did? I don't know that I have the answers. All I know that these are decisions that all of us have to make every day when we present information. I was just writing about a woman named Ruth Muskrat, who was a Native American, and she actually went and gave a speech to President Calvin Coolidge, and what was it? I think it was 23. And she talked about the savage, the wasn't the noble savage. It was something about the Indians emerging from savagery. And she's a woman that I'm including because I want Native American voices in the collection. So do I start with the flaws? Do I conclude with the flaws? What weight do I give them? I'm really problematizing our discussion by saying, it's one thing to be writing a piece that has, an essay that has 2,000 words. It's another to be a columnist like Connie, or like so many of us who have to really condense our information and make choices that matter, that really do matter. I don't have the answers.
Yeah, no, I mean, the questions are what take us to the next place. So I appreciate the questions and you sharing how you're beginning to think about them. And Deborah, you shared some thoughts on these when we all talked last week. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about how you think about this.
Well, we were talking about how far women have come and the fact that there are more women leading newsrooms today. And but I brought up the caveat that more women are leaders in a troubled industry. We don't even really know what our sustainable business model is now. We've been puzzling with that for, I don't know, 15, 20 years now. And so what have women stepped into, and how can we support these women leaders in these organizations, but other organizations too? And to me, it's a larger question too about how do we support the ability of women to speak up in the public conversation, which is a puzzle for me because I support women, but I don't support every idea. I draw the line at humanity. So if your idea is about amplifying and supporting the ability for people to be to achieve their fullest potential, right? And to achieve the fullest metaphorical potential of the American project, then I'm for that. But if you're not, I don't want to hear what you have to say, which is what I want to hear what my sister has to say. She has some problematic attitudes about things. But it's just not about this individualized approach to things. It's about this collective engagement and involvement with each other and supporting each other, and not like re-excavating these topics, but moving the conversation to the next step, which is why I'm really excited to be at the Emancipator, because we want to go back and get people who are just getting involved in these topics and themes, but we also want to speak to people who are engaged with these topics and themes already, right? And drive that conversation forward, because if you accelerate the pace of ideas and building of ideas, then you can just develop so much faster. And I learned that from my work at the Op-Ed Project, where we work to amplify underrepresented expert voices, starting with women, but expanding beyond that. And so I'd be interested to hear from the group on, what does that look like for you, and how can we support each other?
Yes, please, Soraya, please.
So I agree with that. I think a lot of us spend time, and I know I certainly have, having to grapple with the negative cross currents of having an online life. And the idea that somehow that virtual space isn't real, which to me is another kind of private public dichotomy that doesn't really apply, because the violence and the threats we experience online for sharing our thoughts and opinions is very emotionally resonant, because we have all these risks that we have to take into account offline, right? And so we focus a lot on the negatives, but I do think that this medium is radically altering the ability of anyone to control information, and that it's harder to erase things. And while the systems themselves reinscribe existing hierarchies, so if you think about verification systems, initially verification systems just looked at things like org charts, and they said, we're going to verify everyone who's a director and above, which meant 86% white people, 96% men, right? That's how verification initially started, leaving the most vulnerable people in terms of harassment without protections that come with verification. That's an example of a reinscription of an existing power. I think that 10 years past that point, we have a much more open conversation about what it means to try and speak online, what the risks are, what it represents in terms of silencing. But we also understand that there are people who don't stop. They keep speaking. They find allies. They find organizations that can help support them. And that's so critical, right? Like, you cannot weather this alone. You cannot be resilient online by yourself. That's an impossibility, right? You cannot like self-help yourself into free speech. And so finding communities and challenging institutions to support marginalized voices. So newsrooms need to understand the risks in a totally different way. The risks, for example, to a young woman are very different than the risks to a middle-aged older guy. You know, she has to navigate spaces in a completely different way. And that's also true because she brings those risks into the institution. And the institution is then encountering a different threat than it may have encountered 50 years ago. So a threat to a woman's credibility is a threat to the news now, because there are women writing news, whereas that just wasn't the case the same way 50, 60 years ago. So I do think that while we have all of these terrible negative things going on, we also have this incredibly dynamic and revolutionary thing happening in the same space.
That's such a helpful way of describing those forces, those simultaneous forces. And I think I want to pull on two threads and see if I can bring them together. One is the collective power, and the other is sort of where women gain the confidence to persist, to speak their voices and persist. And Connie, I'm going to actually come to you for both. So one piece of this is, you've been teaching opinion writing to students, and I think, have had experiences both in helping them find their voice and maybe tune their voice. And you also have shared with us some insight into the value of collective action when it came to your own career early-ish on, and how being in a guild actually helped as you were at an important point in your career. So I don't know if those two will connect in your response, but they connected in my head, and I will hand it to you.
Thank you. I'm sad about the current guild numbers. For those who aren't familiar with the newspaper industry, the newspaper guild was our union. For example, when I started at the Plain Dealer in '93, they had 407 members of the guild. They have 0 now. It's been gutted. Because I had union membership, I could lose my column if the editor really wanted to do it, because he was threatening to take it away from me, but he couldn't fire me for it. And I made a very conscious decision that I was going to keep writing about the stuff that irritated him. And fortunately for me, and as I said in our meeting earlier, I don't tend to mention the Pulitzer, but the Pulitzer really changed my life in my newsroom, having done it. Not only could they no longer tell me that I couldn't be, they didn't want to be the paper that tried to silence their columnists. They only wanted to win a Pulitzer for the paper in more than 50 years. And so I had that advantage. But I want to talk also about how women can gain confidence in writing. I've been a columnist for 20 years now, and I teach it at my alma mater, Kent State. I'm there as a professional in residence. They asked me to come in. I thought, these are the people I want to teach because my students are overwhelmingly, a third of them are first generation to go to college like I was. They are overwhelmingly have none of the financial advantages of private schools, but boy, the life experience, the richness of life experience that they already bring by the time they're 22, 21, 20, very young, because all of them have jobs. All of them are having jobs to stay in school. Overwhelmingly, they're women. Increasingly, they are women of color. And so to me, what's important is that earlier in our careers, much earlier than I had the opportunity to do, know what you think, know what you believe, follow up with the research and reporting, stop starting so many sentences, even in real time, let alone writing. I think, I believe it. We already know this is your opinion. Don't diminish it. For example, a very easy one. I don't need to say, I believe the 2020 election was fair and legitimate. The 2020 election was fair and legitimate. Because men know how to do this. They state, when you look at male columnists, they typically state everything as fact, right? No matter what they're saying. We tend to be the relationship builders, and we want to leave room for all the different voices. As a columnist, as an opinion writer, I want people to know I know what I'm talking about. I have done the reporting. I could be wrong. I don't ever want to be that, that lecturing finger on the mountaintop. Just think what I do what I do. You'll be all right. Every column is an attempt to start a conversation, but I don't want to be a walking apology for the views I have. And women are so frequently corrected by people who are supposed to love them by saying, well, you're acting like you know everything, or, well, how would you know about this? We are so accustomed to that kind of behavior. And then add online. Sorry, holy cow, add online, right? Add reader mail. There is nothing I have not been called at this point. And now I just make fun of it as much as I can and say, one of these, my favorite was feral feminist. Still, that will be my country band if ever I have one. And the thing is, what they hate the most is when you can laugh at them. I know how hard this is. I know how hard this hate mail can be. If you stand for anything, you're going to have people who object to you. And if you're a woman, I've said this for years now, if you come after my appearance, my weight, or my gender, I already won. Because that meant you had nothing to say to the substance of the argument I was making. And I'm going to own that, and I'm going to call it out. And I understand it comes with time. Look, I'm 65. I no longer care what people think of how I look when I'm trying to get my opinions across. You get used to it and you do grow skin. But the advantage, I hope, with all of us here, I'm older than all of you, I think, is that as we get older, we understand the value that we can bring to encouraging young women in their voices, that we can help them find their courage. And we can say, absolutely, that feels horrible. Absolutely, that is the worst. But this is why you have to have your own tribe. You must have your own group of support. And I love when young women write to me, they have a new piece up and they're starting to get attacked. Is there any chance you could help? You better believe the 800-pound gorilla's coming in, because that's what I hope I can do.
I love that. I have to add one thing. The very name of my book, Listen World, it was Elsie's column. That was the name of her column. And she got ripped to shreds because she had the audacity to tell men what to think. Listen World, why don't you stick to writing about the home and marriage and women's issues? So even the name of her column was, ripped apart by some of her male readers.
Yeah.
Just saying.
I also want to make a quick point that as I look back at these women in history, 1700s, 1800s, you can't believe how many women start off their speeches with apologies. I'm so sorry. It might be my opinion. And also how many women were terrified of public speaking, women that we lionize today. Margaret Sanger, Lucy Stone, they started out with migraines and sickness before they spoke. It's ubiquitous. I mean, it's just astonishing how much trouble women have had throughout history, and the calumny that's been hurled at them because they spoke. I was just writing about Anna Dickinson in 1863. A newspaper critic harped on her voice. He couldn't stand her voice. How could we be expected to listen to such a terrible voice? And I'm just thinking, what is this, 2022 or 1863?
Wasn't so long ago that we have lived our lives in a state of apology. Allison surfaced this when she first started talking about making room for men's comfort before actually amplifying what it is we want to say. And I was thinking about when the Roe decision came down, and we have to remind young women that this history wasn't so long ago, that we are the history. And I was thinking when I was a kid, which was not too long ago, I had to babysit for women in the neighborhood who had to ask their husbands for permission to go to work. Like, imagine asking for permission to sustain yourself or to sustain your family. Like, this is our current reality right now. If you spend any time on TikTok and you see like how young, the social practices of young people, there's just a lot of old stuff that has just been moved right towards to the present.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about TikTok. That's another entire panel. Yeah, that really could be explored.
Yeah, I feel like that is its own conversation. This one necessarily sort of skimmed the surface of so many things, and yet you guys packed so many insights into this and perspectives and questions, and I feel so like all the neurons are firing, and I'm so grateful to you all. I know everybody who's joining us has learned a lot as well. And I think we have, what do we have, like 2 minutes left technically. But we did get a question that might be, I think, a nice one to end on, which is, what are the action items for us that you want us to take away from today's conversation? So maybe just each of you, if you have one, could be tiny, could be big, but what's one thing that you hope folks will do as a result of this conversation?
Sign up for a program with the Op-Ed Project.
Read the Emancipator, theemancipator.org.
I hope everyone here has conversations like this with the people that they live with, not just the people that they are working with.
I think feeling ownership of the space that you're in without apology. We opened the book on purpose with Elsie going directly to William Randolph Hearst, demanding to be paid what she was worth. And she had proof of her success over time. So it's not just shirking away from what you deserve, it's owning it and gathering evidence of your power in your job and then going for it.
When I speak in person, in audiences full of women, I try always to ask them at some point, how many of you have ever told your story, even to people who think they know you best? And you will see women tear up because that's the answer. They have not.
Yeah.
And so I would say this, that any step, there is no small step when it's a step forward, right? And owning your own story and seeing the value in your story and starting to share the value of your story helps you find your voice, helps you see your place in the world. And it does make you want to do more because you start to feel your power.
Thank you all. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Please, everybody stay well. please come back. We want to keep talking with you, everybody whose faces we see, with you, everybody whose faces we don't see. We're really, really grateful for this conversation and for conversations like this, and want to see you again soon. Be well, everybody.